There are names in history that are more than just names. They are legends etched into the cultural bedrock of a nation. They conjure images of dust and smoke, of thundering hooves and the cold gleam of a revolver. In the epic story of the American West, few names loom larger or cast a longer, darker shadow than that of Jesse James. He was the outlaw king, the supposed Robin Hood of Missouri, a ghost who rode the moonlit backroads, striking fear into the hearts of railroad barons and bankers. His life was a whirlwind of violence, rebellion, and dime novel fame. But every legend has a human cost. Every whirlwind leaves a wreckage in its wake. When the final gunshot echoed in his home on April 3, 1882, the shot that ended his life, it marked the beginning of a new, quieter, and far more complicated story. The story of the family he left behind. They say the sins of the father are to be laid upon the children. It's a biblical warning that feels custom-made for the heirs of Jesse James. What becomes of the children who grow up in the shadow of America's most infamous outlaw? Do they inherit the rebellion, the violence, the notoriety? You might think their futures were pre-written, their fates sealed by blood and gunpowder, destined for a life of crime or tragedy. But the truth, as is so often the case, is far more complex, more shocking, and in its own way, more inspiring. The story of Jesse James's 4 children is not a simple tale of an outlaw dynasty. It is a profound human drama of survival, identity, and the relentless struggle to define oneself against the weight of a legend. In this deep dive, we will uncover the forgotten lives of all 4 of them. We will journey alongside his son Jesse Jr. as he faces a dramatic courtroom showdown that eerily mirrors his father's legacy. We will walk in the quiet footsteps of his daughter Mary, a woman who dedicated her life to escaping the very name that made her brother infamous. And we will pause to remember the twin boys whose heartbreakingly short lives represent a secret sorrow buried deep within the James family mythos. I have spent weeks combing through historical archives, reading personal letters, and poring over the sensational newspaper accounts of the era, to separate fact from the fiction that has long shrouded this family. What emerges is not just a historical account, but a powerful story about legacy itself, about what it means to be born into a story you didn't write, and the courage it takes to find your own voice. So settle in. This is not the story of Jesse James the outlaw. This is the untold story of his children. Number 3, the son in the spotlight, Jesse Edward James. Our story begins with the child who bore the heaviest burden, the one the world watched with bated breath, the son and heir, Jesse Edward James. Born in 1875, he came into a world where his father was already a living legend. His nursery rhymes were likely drowned out by the whispers of Paz's and Pinkerton agents. His childhood was not one of peaceful farm life, but of constant motion, a nomadic existence dictated by his father's need to evade the law. He wasn't known to the world as Jesse James Jr. That name was too dangerous a beacon for lawmen. Instead, he was Tim Edwards, one of several aliases his family adopted to blend into the quiet communities of Tennessee and Missouri. Imagine for a moment the mind of that young boy. At home, he saw a father, a man who by many accounts was gentle and doting, a man who told him stories perhaps of the Civil War, casting himself as a wronged Confederate soldier, a victim of Northern aggression. But outside the home, he would hear whispers of another man, a ruthless train robber, a cold-blooded killer. This duality defined his youth. He was caught between pride and shame, between the love for his father and the fear of what his father was. The James name was a source of secret pride, a connection to a figure of mythic proportions. But it was also a curse, a brand that marked him a shadow from which he could never fully escape. Then in 1882, when he was just 6 years old, his world shattered. He was in the yard of their home in St. Joseph, Missouri, when he heard the gunshot from inside. He ran in to find his father dead on the floor, betrayed and shot in the back of the head by Robert Ford, a member of his own gang. The life on the run was over. The chaos was just beginning. His mother, Z, now a widow, was left to pick up the pieces. She tried to give her children a normal life, but normalcy was a luxury the James family could not afford. The name followed them everywhere. As Jesse Jr. grew into a young man, the public's fascination intensified. He looked like his father. He had the same piercing eyes, the same quiet intensity. And so the world asked the inevitable question, is the outlaw blood too strong? Will he follow in his father's footsteps? For a time, it seemed he might. As a young man in his early 20s, he was adrift, struggling to find his place. The weight of expectation was immense. And then in 1898, the world's worst fears, or perhaps its most cynical hopes, were realized. Jesse James Jr., age 23, was arrested and charged with the robbery of a Missouri Pacific train. The headlines exploded across the state. Jesse James's son arrested. Like father, like son. History, it seemed, was repeating itself with a vengeance. The trial, held in Kansas City in 1899, became a national spectacle. It was more than just a trial for robbery. It was a trial of a legacy. Dime novelists, journalists, and curious onlookers flocked to the city, eager to see if the son was a chip off the old block. The prosecution built their case on this very idea. Their argument was simple and powerful. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They paraded witnesses who claimed to identify him, but their primary weapon was his name. They were prosecuting a ghost as much as a man. In the eyes of the law and much of the public, he was guilty by association, his fate preordained by his DNA. Imagine Jesse Jr. standing in that packed courtroom, the air thick with prejudice and expectation. He maintained his innocence, his face a stoic mask. His prominent legal team fought back fiercely. Their defense was equally simple. This young man is not on trial for what he did, but for who his father was. They argued that he was a convenient scapegoat, an easy target for lawmen eager to close a case and make a name for themselves by taking down another Jesse James. The drama was palpable. Day after day, witnesses testified, lawyers thundered, and Jesse Jr. sat in silence, the weight of his father's sins pressing down on him. The jury retreated to deliberate. The nation held its breath. Was this the beginning of a new James gang? Or the tragic end for a young man trapped by his past? The verdict came back. Not guilty. He was acquitted of all charges. A collective gasp, then a wave of relief washed over the James family. He had stared into the abyss of his father's world, a world of crime and punishment, and he had been pulled back from the brink. Whether he was truly innocent or had merely escaped justice, the experience changed him forever. The cold iron bars of a jail cell, the scornful eyes of the public, the very real possibility of losing his freedom. It was a brutal but effective lesson. That trial was his crucible. It forged in him a resolve to walk a different path. And in a twist of irony so perfect, it feels like fiction, just a few years later in 1905, the outlaw's son became a crime victim himself. He was held up at gunpoint by a robber who took $300 from him. The newspapers reported it with a sense of cosmic amusement. The incident was a bizarre public confirmation of his new life. He was no longer the one holding the gun. But Jesse Jr. wasn't content just to avoid a life of crime. He was determined to live a life in direct opposition to it. While running a small pawn shop, he spent his nights poring over law books, driven by a powerful ambition. Imagine the discipline, the sheer force of will it must have taken. Every page he turned was an act of defiance against his father's legacy. And then in 1906, he achieved the unthinkable. Jesse Edward James passed the Missouri bar exam. He was now a licensed attorney. Let the profound poetry of that sink in. The son of America's most famous lawbreaker, a man who had made a mockery of the justice system, was now an officer of the court. He had sworn an oath to uphold the very laws his father had so spectacularly broken. It was the ultimate rebellion, not with a gun, but with a law degree. He was building a new life personally as well. In 1900, he married Stella McGowan. The wedding was held in the parlor of his ailing mother's home, so she could be present to witness her son embrace a future of peace and stability. He became a devoted husband and, in time, a father. But in another symbolic break from the past, he and Stella had no sons to carry the James name into another generation. They had 4 daughters. The home of Jesse James Jr. was not a hideout for outlaws, but a sanctuary filled with the laughter of little girls. The son of the hyper-masculine, violent outlaw had become a proud girl dad. He didn't, however, abandon his father's memory. Instead, he sought to control it. In 1899, fresh off his acquittal, he wrote a book, Jesse James, My Father. It was a son's attempt to reclaim the narrative, to present the man behind the myth, a father who told stories, a husband who loved his wife. It was the first time the public had seen the legend through the eyes of his own family. Years later, he took this effort to an entirely new level. In the 1920s, as the silent film era romanticized the Wild West, Jesse Jr. stepped in front of the camera. He starred as his own father in 2 films, Jesse James Under the Black Flag and Jesse James as the Outlaw. It's a truly surreal piece of history. Audiences watched the legend of Jesse James being performed by the one person who carried his actual blood. Was it an act of honoring his father? An attempt to cash in on the name? Or perhaps a strange therapeutic act of literally embodying the ghost that had haunted him his entire life? In his later years, he moved his family to Los Angeles, leaving the ghosts of Missouri behind for good. There, in the land of reinvention, he opened a restaurant. Its name, the Jesse James Inn. He had come full circle. The name he once had to hide behind an alias was now a brand, a novelty to attract customers. He had finally, it seemed, made peace with his legacy. Jesse Edward James Jr. lived to be 75, passing away in 1951. A lawyer, a businessman, a husband and a father. A man who had successfully outrun his father's shadow. Number 2. The daughter in the shadows, Mary Susan James. Jesse Jr.'s life was a public battle with his father's ghost. But while the world was fixated on the son, a quieter, more personal struggle was taking place. This is the story of Jesse James's daughter, Mary Susan James. Her life, unlike her brother's, was not a fight for redemption, but a fight for anonymity. Born in 1879, Mary was a toddler, not even 3 years old when her father was killed. She had no memories of him. For her, the legendary outlaw wasn't a father. He was a story a phantom whispered about by others. He was the reason for her mother's sorrow, the reason for the family's notoriety, but he was not a presence in her life. This lack of memory became the defining feature of her existence. While Jesse Jr. grappled with the complex legacy of a man he knew and loved, Mary grappled only with his infamous name. Her upbringing was the mirror opposite of her brother's. In the rigid society of the late 19th century, sons were expected to carry on a legacy, while daughters were expected to be quiet and respectable. For Mary, this societal expectation was a shield. Her mother Z poured all her energy into raising Mary to be the antithesis of the James reputation. Her childhood was one of quiet domesticity, church school helping her mother with household tasks. But even in this sheltered world, the name was inescapable. Every introduction, every new acquaintance brought with it the flicker of recognition, the unspoken question, "Are you his daughter?" Her life was a constant, subtle negotiation with her own identity. Her brother's trial in 1899 must have been a terrifying time for her. To see the family name dragged through the mud once more, to see her brother facing prison, it reinforced her desire to escape, to blend in, to become invisible. Her great escape came in 1901. A year after her mother passed away, Mary, now 21, married a respectable man from a good family, Henry Lafayette Barr. On her wedding day, she did more than just take a husband. She shed the name that had been both her birthright and her burden. She was no longer Mary James. She was Mary Barr. It was a profound act of self-creation. She and Henry settled down in Missouri and built a life that was aggressively, beautifully ordinary. Mary embraced the role of wife and mother with a deep sense of purpose. This was her chance to build the stable, peaceful family that had been stolen from her. They had 4 children, 3 sons, Lawrence, Forrest, and Chester, and a daughter, Henrietta. The sons would carry the Barr name, a name untainted by stories of robbery and violence. But tragedy, it seems, was a persistent echo in this family. In a cruel parallel to her own parents' loss of their twin boys, Mary's infant daughter, Henrietta, passed away at just 7 months old. It was a private heartbreak, another sorrow for a woman who had known too much of it. For the rest of her life, Mary remained fiercely private. She was known in her community as a kind, gentle lady. Neighbors described her as quiet and dignified. Looking at her, you would never connect this respectable matriarch to the most feared gunslinger of the Wild West. Her life's work was the successful erasure of her past. But there is one fascinating, almost inexplicable footnote to her story. Remember the 1921 silent film Jesse James Under the Black Flag, starring her brother? In a decision that baffles historians, Mary Susan James Barr, the woman who ran from the spotlight, her entire life appears in that film. Her role was minor, likely an uncredited extra. But she was there. Why? Why would she participate in the public mythologizing of the fathers she never knew and the names she worked so hard to escape? Was it a final curious glance back at the legacy she'd disowned? Was it a simple act of sisterly support for her brother Jesse Jr.? We will never truly know. It remains a mysterious, fleeting moment when the quiet daughter stepped out of the shadows and onto the silver screen. After that brief and bizarre brush with Hollywood, she returned to her quiet life. She watched her sons grow up, she became a grandmother, and she lived out her days as Mrs. Mary Barr. She passed away on October 11, 1935, at the age of 56. Her husband died in the same year, a final somber note to a life lived in search of peace. Mary's legacy is not one of drama or fame, but of the quiet triumph of a woman who refused to be defined by her father's sins. Number 1. The Lost Twins, Gould and Montgomery James. The stories of Jesse Jr. and Mary are the stories of the children who survived, who wrestled with their father's legacy and found their own way. But to understand the full human tragedy of this family, we must go back to a cold winter's night in 1878, to a story of two little boys who never had a chance to have a story at all. This is perhaps the most hidden chapter in the life of Jesse James. A moment of profound personal loss that strips away the outlaw myth and reveals the man. In late February of 1878, while on the run and living under an alias, his wife Z went into a difficult premature labor. On February 28th, she gave birth to twin sons. In a life defined by instability, this should have been a moment of profound joy. But the boys were desperately small, their hold on life fragile. In a gesture that speaks volumes about their hope and desperation, Jesse and Z named the infants after the two doctors who were working tirelessly to save them, Dr. Gould and Dr. Montgomery. For a few fleeting days, the most wanted man in America was not an outlaw. He was a father sitting by the bedside of his newborn sons, praying for a miracle. This man, whose hands had brought so much death into the world, was now faced with two tiny, innocent lives he was utterly powerless to protect. The miracle never came. Both Gould and Montgomery James died within days of their birth. The world didn't notice. The newspapers were busy reporting on the James gang's latest movements. There were no headlines for the outlaws' lost sons. But within the walls of their rented home, the loss was catastrophic. Jesse and Z buried their twin boys near the family farm in Kearney, Missouri. There were no grand headstones, just simple markers for the children the world never knew. This quiet tragedy is crucial to understanding the full picture. It reveals a vulnerability, a human core to a man so often depicted as a heartless monster. He was a father who mourned, a man who had suffered the most universal and devastating of losses. The story of his children is forever incomplete without remembering the two who were lost to the silence, Gould and Montgomery. From a sensational trial that captivated a nation to a quiet life of determined anonymity, to a secret sorrow buried on a Missouri farm, the lives of Jesse James's children are a powerful testament to the enduring struggle for identity. Jesse Jr. fought his legacy in the public arena and won, transforming the family name into one of respectability. Mary fought her legacy in private, finding freedom by letting the name go. And the twins Gould and Montgomery represent the silent human cost of the violent world their father created. Their stories show us that a name can be both a prison and a platform. They prove that we are more than just the product of our parents, that we have the power to write our own narrative, even when the first chapter has been written for us in blood. The long shadow of Jesse James stretched across generations, but in the end, his children found their own light. This theme of the dark shadows cast by notorious figures is something we have explored before here on the channel. In fact, in our comprehensive deep dive on the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy, we examined how his stunning charisma and intelligence masked a truly evil and monstrous nature. If you're interested in the psychology of how such darkness can hide in plain sight, you can watch that video by clicking the link on the screen right here. And that very video sparked a tidal wave of questions from all of you, but one stood out above all others. Whatever happened to Ted Bundy's daughter, Rose? A child who was conceived and born while her father was on death row. Her life is one of the greatest mysteries connected to any true crime story. a story shrouded in secrecy and speculation. That is exactly what we will be investigating in a future video. It's a story you won't want to miss, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have the notification bell turned on. If you found this untold story of the James children as moving and fascinating as I did, please take a moment to hit that like button. It's a small click for you, but it makes a huge difference for the channel. And I truly want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and let me know which child's story surprised you the most. Was it the outlaw's son who became a lawyer, or the daughter who found peace by disappearing? Thank you for joining me on this journey into a forgotten corner of American history. I'm your narrator. See you in the next one.